Publishing shaped by state standards and politicians, historiographic articles written by the majority of white males with shiny degrees who do not take in the memories of those who were touched by said history, classroom textbooks with narratives more interested in emphasizing the compassion of enslavers in the United States of America than the cruelty endured by the enslaved, hundreds of thousands of voices of minorities left unheard. This is the reality of what is being fed to our children on the daily basis, programming their mind to succumb to the dominant hand of oppressors. Panel, we are writing history as we speak. We're privileged people who have not experienced the historical facts that we used to win debates, who grew up around washed out stories and who are retelling those stories now. As team proposition, we believe that history is never neutral, and thus it is much more valuable to take into accountability those who are directly in contact with history. All in all, the side of which achieves teaching the complex nature of history more effectively and on which side kids will not repeat history's mistakes will win this debate. So how does the world of side proposition look like? The proposition's world of teaching history encompasses but is not limited to written out first-person statements such as speeches, letters, diary entries, autobiographies, creative works, etc., compiled from different groups of backgrounds, races, genders, and age, emphasizing the narratives of those who were directly touched by or participated in the historic event. For example, using the diary of Anne Frank to explain Holocaust, the letters of W.E. Du Bois to explain the racial problems post-World War I, or the writings of Frances Willard to explain the women's temperance movement. They would be of the written at the time and around the time of the event, provided with information about them and followed by discussions and analysis of them. So today I will have two arguments for you. First one being, how does this offer a much more realistic portrayal of history? And second of all, how does this uplift minorities and unifies and improves society? So moving on to the first argument, a much more realistic portrayal of history. What is the purpose of teaching history? 3 points. First one, textbooks are supposed to teach facts about who we are and what the stories are key to our society, right? Second of all, they shape the mindsets of future generations as these narratives are taught on the daily basis for children going through their developmental years. And third of all, understanding the experiences of others and the complex nature of intertwining stories is a key component to history. Why is that all important? Kids turn to adults who make decisions at work, in personal life, at the ballot box. This is imperative for our communal way of life that those decisions be informed of external points of reference that are moral and compassionate. On the flip side, all the neutral and political teaching of history does is make children focus on the white man drawing lines on the map and treating their people like resources to reach even more power. So how do current historiographic methods fail that purpose? 4 points. First one being, textbook and historic paper authors do not reflect the diversity of society. History is still usually washed out despite the cosmetic diversity. This looks like more than 3/4 of history textbook writers in the United States being white. Secondly, textbooks and historic papers are written by historians, people with degrees, excluding those who, due to the poverty cycle, could not achieve higher education to tell their stories, primarily people of color. Third one, textbooks are politicized. This looks like large states, those who can deliver big sales to publishing companies, and may require school systems to buy particular textbooks, having a massive say in what content makes its way into students' hands and minds. And fourth one, secondary sources are washed out. They do not offer the perspective of how the historical event took place, only the what. The dry material is served as the most factual and relevant. Why is this all bad? 2 points. Without the first-person accounts, historical methods can claim to be unbiased and value-free, which is completely impossible to achieve. Why? The authority of textbooks coupled with the objectivity of the technical knowledge that they communicate encourages students to accept unquestionably the impressions and the worldview created by the language of textbooks. In turn, this shapes their view of history and society's ideals. Secondly, the factual information produced is not unbiased or value-free. Thus, on a comparative, if we can choose the facts from one person or the facts of a diverse pool of people who are touched by the historic events, we choose the latter. So let's take a comparative. How the women's suffrage movement is portrayed now and how it would be portrayed from the eyes of those who participated. So currently, men are seen as the main oppressors of women, denying them the right to vote or work, portraying it as if it is a women versus man fight, right? But on the other hand, Josie Miller examined 15 widely used college books. Not one of them stated how men were actually more progressive than women were, and how it was a matter of narrow-mindedness, which was clearly stated is Susan B. Anthony's first-person statements on women's suffrage laws. But either way, how do first-person accounts help tackle the current problem of history teaching? 4 points. First one, they do not try to appear neutral. First-person accounts encompass the true feelings of those who were in direct contact with history. But secondly, they are not taken at face value. This means that historic figures are shown having depth and are put more accountability for their words as opposed to hiding them. Third one, they're produced by those who participated or were touched by the history. If you were speaking or writing about it, you were touched by it, right? But fourth one, they allow more voices to be heard. It does not require a college degree to write a letter fueled by emotions from oppressor but it conveys the true feelings of that time. It also allows us to understand the emotions that were felt and can make it more relatable and easier to understand. And now moving on to the second point, how does this uplift minorities and unifies and improves society? This argument will be twofold. First, I'll dive into how this helps us with the hard history and unheard voices, and secondly, I'll talk about how this achieves the set purpose of history and unifies the nation under the correct storytelling. So the first point, how does this help with unheard voices? So who currently writes history? Currently, the history is written by the dominant groups of society that day, whether it's the ruling race, party, or belief. So how is it important? Textbooks or secondary sources are influenced by the political, ideological, or moral beliefs of their authors. Usually these beliefs support the status quo or conventional understandings of what is praiseworthy or blameworthy in history. This looks like the Japanese being described from a military perspective by authors of allies who were at war with Japan in 20th century, in which the impression is stringently conveyed that they are aggressive militaristic kamikazes, right? But secondly, this looks like the California version of a popular McGraw-Hill textbook, including language on redlining and housing discrimination against African Americans after the Second World War. Yet, owing to different state standards, the Texas version does not even mention it. Depending on what state they're sold in, textbooks with the same titles, either tempering or amplifying subjects such as Reconstruction, LGBT rights, and gun control in stark ways when compared side by side. But how do first-person accounts help vocalize the struggle of minorities? As minorities are disadvantaged in politics and education, basically anywhere where history is written and shaped, now they are exempt from having to be in a political power position or having a college degree to showcase what was happening. This leads to empowerment of stories of those mostly left unheard, common people and especially minorities who did not have the power to convey their struggles. So why is it important? 2 points. The current misunderstanding and the discrimination stems from what we know and believe. If from an early age we face the primary sources of historiography, we at the same time face our prejudices and beliefs of what the people were experiencing during the historical events. And secondly, it moves the attention from those who are oppressed to the as opposed to those who benefited from said oppression. But moving on to the second point, how does it unify and improve society? 3 points. First one, it allows all voices of the society to be heard and have their own history represented without picking out the most important parts to retell, thus not picking out the most important parts of society. Secondly, it shapes the society into believing that everyone and their past matters equally, as opposed to on-side opposition where people only succumb to a single factual viewpoint written by the dominant forces and able to reflect, analyze, and thus furthering the divide and misunderstandings between different groups of society. But thirdly, due to being more emotion-fueled, it not only shows but raises the feeling of unity and mutual understanding that are also based on factual information of what was happening. The history becomes much more graspable and relatable. Why is this important? 3 points. First one, but whether they like it or not, countries share history on whichever side of it they were. Side proposition believes that the subjectivity is the innate nature of history, the different viewpoints within the society. Secondly, it helps people realize the actual impact of history, not just to grasp the numbers, making society much more empathetic towards those who struggle. And thirdly, it helps shape their education habits in 2 ways. Firstly, students can help learn the meaning of society's ideals by studying textbooks that underemphasize the need for justice and equality, or by memorizing historical events that portray injustices. And secondly, it helps develop critical thinking skills. Evaluating primary sources helps with the skills that are crucial in the time of vast access to information. As team proposition, we believe that statements in textbooks such as many slaves may not have been terribly unhappy with their lot, for they knew no other, are not acceptable in our modern day society. Vote prop.